So now with all these new features added, we're almost done for this section. But there's one problem with this app. And to show this problem, I deleted all items but one, which I added. And if I now also delete this last item, you will see that if I reload here, I'm stuck again in this loading spinner state. I don't see an error message and I don't see the fallback text either. And we have this behavior here because we're actually facing an error here. An error which you can see in the debug console. This unhandled exception type null is not a subtype of type map error. Now we're getting this error here because in the end now I have no items left on my backend. But here in load items, I'm trying to decode my response body. So I'm trying to decode that data which I'm getting back from the backend. And I'm telling Dart that the decoded data will be a map where I have string keys and different kinds of values. The problem is that if I have no items on Firebase, response body won't yield such a map though. Instead, if I print response body here and I restart the app, you will see that here it's of type null. This very first line here, it's of type null. So we got no data back. And that's why we're getting this error thereafter, because null, when decoded here, is not giving us a map. So therefore here, we should add an extra check and check if response body is equal null, which means we got no data from the backend. And in that case, I want to simply return and not execute any more code. Though I also want to do at least one thing before I return. I want to set my state and set isLoading to false, because we're not loading anymore. We're done with that. We got a response. It doesn't have any data attached to it, but we still got a response. So we're done loading, and I therefore want to get rid of my loading spinner. But thereafter, we want to return to make sure that none of this code here executes, and we're not running into this error which we just saw. Now with that added, you actually learn though, if you hover over these blue squiggly lines, that response body can't possibly be null. And indeed, if I hover over body, it's always a string. There is no question mark after string, so this is never null. Now we saw null in the debug console because actually what Firebase does here is it returns the string null. So a string with the text null inside of it. So this logic here should be backend specific. Some backends might return an empty string. Others do something like Firebase and return null in a string. Yet others might use a certain response status code for which you want to check. For example, a 404 or anything like this status code. So it depends on the backend. For Firebase, it's this check here, which you want to add to make sure that we're getting rid of the loading indicator, but that we're not going through this logic here if we got no data from the backend. And with that, if we save that and reload, you see that now we only briefly had that loading indicator and then we see that fallback text. So adding this logic here was one thing I wanted to do.